Tim is the founder and executive director of the Foundation for the Future. He's a former Army officer and was most recently working as a CIA officer supporting the National Space Council. He holds 2 master's degrees, one in intelligence studies and one in international relations and affairs from American University. Tim is a quick learner and a challenger of the status quo. One summer, he switched from a team working in Pakistani politics to a team working in satellite threats. After less than 30 days on the job, his work was selected for a presentation at a satellite threat conference due to its sophistication. Tim's passion for space and humanity's evolution in space is deep. He is the author of the book, Humanity in Space, found on Amazon, and various articles on the topic. His next challenge and mission is to create the backbone of America's next century in space. Please welcome Tim Chrisman.
Thanks, Lila. So if you've been here the past couple days, there will be similarities between what I'm talking about now and what we've discussed. But ultimately, the aim of today's presentation is to get into the why. One of the things I try to do in any of my talks, any of my writing, anything I do is answer the question, so what, or why now? And that's what we're trying to do today, discussing why space infrastructure, why does it matter? And I plan on grounding this not only in the economic benefits, but also why a new organization is needed for managing this. So we've talked about how there is this gap in the space ecosystem where NASA is looking far afield, is pushing the frontiers of science and human exploration. Space Force was created for a national security imperative, and the private sector has really been an innovation engine driving a lot of new technology, but there's no underpinnings for much of what is needed to enable further success. And so our proposal, we talked in detail about this yesterday, was creating a private infrastructure development corporation in partnership with the federal government. It would be a federally chartered corporation with a mandate to develop space infrastructure. And it, in cooperation with the rest of the federal government and the private sector, would be able to leverage both private equity, NASA funds, DoD funds, and even state infrastructure funds to really accelerate the expansion of humanity into space. So the question that often happens when infrastructure investments on the ground and in space get talked about is, cool, why do we need it? And there's a perennial report card that comes out every time Congress comes back into session where the American Civil Engineer Society says, America needs more roads, more bridges. We give you a D or an F, America, because your infrastructure is so bad. I've adapted a quote here about why you should never listen to civil engineers when they talk about infrastructure investment. And it is a little tongue-in-cheek because at the end of the day, it is civil engineers' jobs to evaluate the status of it, just like it's your barber's job to tell you your hair's bad. But with space, we've had a different situation where there are not people driving over the potholes who see an American Civil Engineer Society report and say, yeah, that's about right. I would grade my roads as a D. I would grade my rocket to space as a D. We don't have that. And so we're in a weird situation where there is not a constituency in space that cares about the infrastructure, but the impact of investment in that infrastructure may be far greater than investments in any other single kind of infrastructure. Infrastructure is often talked about, at least in economic terms, in how it is able to have a multiplicative effect on the economic output. So there's a wide variation in what's called the infrastructure multiplier effect number, depending on which economic school you're in. If you are Keynesian, or if you care about the gold standard, you're going to differ on what this number is. A relatively conservative number I have displayed here, but ultimately what this is the estimate of the effect of economic activity increasing for every dollar the government borrows to spend on infrastructure. Now, not all government spending is created equal. And as you can see here, there are different estimates for how much economic activity changes based on different forms of spending increases. This is part of a larger study done for Congress several years ago, talking about how stimulus money can help boost the economy. This was done during a time of high employment and relatively strong growth. And so while it is essentially saying you get $1.50 of economic activity back for every dollar you put in, our position is that's a fairly conservative estimate when you're talking about an entirely new domain. This number includes remodeling the New York subway system and putting in a new road in the farm country of Kansas. Both of those may be equally needed in terms of the old infrastructure deteriorating, but the economic impact of the same amount spent in each place is dramatically different. Our argument in space is that this infrastructure spending multiplier far underestimates the effect of what a dollar spent in space infrastructure would return. There aren't a lot of examples of space infrastructure spending, and the one we shamelessly cherry pick is GPS. The estimated cost of the current constellation is about $12 billion. And over the life of GPS, it's returned nearly 100-fold. So instead of it being $1.50 for every one spent, it's $100 returned for every dollar spent. And the numbers here are intentionally misleading and intentionally overblown. The realistic effect of a sustained push for increased investment in space is likely closer to 3 to 5 times the amount spent. But the example is still there, because when there is nothing, every investment goes a very long way. And so when we are looking and talking about spending on space infrastructure, spending on essentially roads to new areas, railroads to new resource development locations, these are investments in not guaranteed futures, but as close as you can get to a guaranteed economic payout that any federal investment can have. I am not an economist, and so I should not be the one talking about the economic investments or the benefits of that. And so I will leave further exegesis of the economic benefits of investments to others. We have commissioned a study on what the actual impact of different proposals that we've put forward would be, different funding levels, different models of investment. And by our January Blue Marble event, we hope to be able to share some of the results of that. The short version is what I just conveyed there. But what I do feel more confident in and more excited about is the idea that we need a new organization to manage that investment. Those of us here believe in the idea of space benefiting humanity. We're bought into this dream of a new frontier, a new environment for humans to live and work in, and ultimately how that will benefit everyone. And so it's not to you that I need to convince of the benefits, but it is to you that we look to partner to create a new organization to manage the new investments, the new frontier, the new focus. And so I'm going to break down sort of where we see our proposed organization fitting inside the at least federal architecture for space, and why in our proposed future that creates a synergistic effect between NASA up and out, Space Force protecting and defending, and Space Corp being the backbone enabler. A lot of time gets spent by me, by others in the foundation, answering questions about, oh, doesn't NASA do that? And every time we make a new proposal or talk about a project, that is the reflexive thought, is it's space, therefore NASA. Realistically, though, NASA's vision, and this is pulled from their website, is to expand what humans know, and they do that in space. Their mission is to push the envelope for space technology. It's not to move humans off world. It's not to create communities in space. And ultimately, its mission is more akin to the frontier agencies of the 1800s, who had a mandate to explore the American West, to prospect, rather than the modern day Commerce Department or Transportation Department. Space Force, created in response to rising threats in space, it is essentially America's space navy, protecting freedom of access, enabling freedom of movement, and ensuring commerce is safe for all. Again, nowhere in here is this a creating, building, enabling an economic future, human habitation. And that's not wrong. In neither of these cases are these organizations meant for that. And so that's where we see Space Corp fitting in, is similar to how the Commerce Department, Transportation Department, National Highway Trust Fund, the host of federal agencies, banks, and affiliated executive departments work to promote economic activity, to fund the creation of the boring backbone systems ranging from utilities to guardrails. That's where Space Corp comes in. Ideally, it is able to slide in and work in concert with a lot of the regulatory agencies that are already working on space policies. There's not a use or need for a new regulatory agency that is going to add to the already overtaxed private sector in terms of regulations for safety, launch windows, and the like. Ideally, Space Corp provides the single point for those regulatory agencies in the private sector to come together. And it does that because its mandate would be to promote growth through the creation of space infrastructure, through the creation of sustainable, efficient, and ultimately cheap space access systems. When an organization has that mandate through its congressional charter, now it has essentially the motivation to reach out to other federal agencies to bring them on board in order to accomplish its missions. And no longer is the impetus solely on private corporations. The proposals we've put forward and the ambitions for this new federally chartered corporation are not new. Infrastructure development banks, space development corporations, national spaceport development corporations. These ideas have been circulating for years, in some cases decades. We see the time being right and this idea having ripened because of the work of many of you who have spent years or decades pushing the envelope of what is possible, taking technology from fringe to mainstream, and suddenly we're at a point when space, while not quite real, suddenly seems a lot more accessible, starts to seem a little more reasonable as a place to go, as a place to visit, as a place to live. And so in talks with some of you, with others in the space community, our message has always been, this isn't our idea that's been hand delivered to us from some divine source and we're going to die on this hill fighting for it. But instead, this is the proposal we think takes the best of what the community has developed over the last decades, makes it into something that is palatable both to Congress and provides the most benefit to the American people and the American taxpayers. Now, how can we move forward with it? How can we partner to make it better, both with you, with federal agencies, with Congress? Because at the end of the day, success is the federal government and state governments treating space as another domain to invest in. Not in cost plus contracts, not in giant bridges to nowhere, but in actual useful investments in a future that benefits us.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that. Love your presentation. Really kind of an amazing idea and vision. When you start talking about a future that benefits us, what does that mean, right? We've got these programs, we've got some good ideas out there. But where do you think that gets us, right? Like, we're working pretty hard to create this Blue Marble Week, to create this legislation, to change things for, build out space infrastructure. Where do you think that gets us? What do we get from doing all this?
So I guess it depends on the person. We see 3 or 4 key groups of people that are motivated to get behind this and who benefit the most first. There's the entrepreneur who is searching for a new way to build something great. And for them, there is the ability to start businesses that previously required hundreds of millions, if not more, in upfront investment and decades of lead time to put a system in orbit, to go to orbit and build a company. It's not a short setup or a e-commerce site. This is a multi-year process.
Right.
There's no reason for that. Just like there was no reason for it to be a multi-year process to start a store. The internet came, fixed that. So that's where the first sort of benefit is. The second is knowledge. NASA spends a lot of its money and time maintaining things that, while advancing science, are not the low-hanging fruit of exploration and development. They're maintaining the International Space Station. That is a drain that they don't need to have. Refocus that money outward and let the private sector, in partnership with an infrastructure development corporation, build out LEO. And the third group are those people that Ernest Shackleton talked to when he placed his newspaper ad in 1913 to go to Antarctica, where he said men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. And that was it. That was the ad.
That was awesome.
5,000 people responded to that ad. And this was not a depression.
Oh, right.
This was good times in England. There were 5,000 crazy people who were like, yeah, that sounds great. I don't even know what we're doing.
Right.
And those people benefit because they are looking for a part of history. They want to make a difference. And they're the ones who will.
Nice.
And so those are the 3 sort of groups. At the end of the day, though, their work benefits those who don't care.
Right, yeah.
The people who worked on the polio vaccine directly benefited their companies and the kids who were vaccinated. the rest of us benefited because we didn't have to suffer the economic impact of caring for the kids with polio. And now the benefit is we don't even have to think about polio.
Right.
And so the effects for people who don't care, right, wrong, or indifferent, is it fades into the background.
Right. It becomes
Just
a
makes you better.
higher quality of living, a higher standard of living for everybody in the world,
Yeah.
whether they go to space or not, whether they know that their cars' brakes work better and stop in time. That's just that's a necessary side benefit to the rest of the economy, but most folks don't know that. All right. Well, thank you very much, Tim. Super interesting to hear this, and you know, it might be kind of a dull process to work through these congressional steps, but the results are pretty exciting. We're going to swap over to Lila. Thank you very much, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Michael.